more because they're speaking about the same time, right? Surprise, I'm going to talk about Jeremiah a little bit, but Lamentations was written by Jeremiah, or at least I would say it was, written at the same time and written about the same time period that Isaiah is talking about. And it's this crying out to God. These people have been totally just destroyed. Their city's been destroyed. Their temple, their place of worship's been destroyed. Their livelihood's been destroyed. They've seen their family members killed in front of them. They've seen their wives and daughters raped in front of them. Their men raped in front of them. They've seen them taken away to a foreign land. I mean, the only thing you can really compare it to is the Holocaust. I mean, most recently in this time frame, there's some atrocities that go on in other places as well, like Africa and the Far East in Asia. So we have this idea that I think a lot of us here can't even comprehend the deepness of the sorrow they were feeling. So Lamentations was written as a book, and I kind of made a post a couple weeks ago that sometimes the Bible doesn't have the answer, right? Sometimes we go through all of these struggles and trials and we cry out to God, and sometimes there's no answer to the why. The answer is because God. The answer is so that we will be remembered, we will be reminded to lean on God, to how strong will our faith remain, and sometimes it's hard to deal with those times of no answer. So these people were feeling that same thing. It's this idea of like, why did this happen to me? Why did I see my family killed? Why did all these atrocities and this trauma happen to me? Anybody ever had trauma in their life? I mean, I've had some trauma in my life, and we've all had different levels. But the one thing about trauma is that it's just as extreme to me as yours is to you, right? And we can compare back and forth and say, this trauma was worse than his, hers was worse than hers, but it's just as extreme and bad to the person that suffers it. And what really hit me in the past year or so was this idea during this time period of the exile, was that a lot of these people, they were doing right. They had a heart for God. They suffered these things because they were part of a nation and a community, and collectively they weren't doing what was right. But there were people like you and I mean, we're not the most righteous people, right? Everybody is sinful, has a sinful nature we have to work against. But they were people who had a heart for God and longed for Him and wanted to follow after Him. You know what? They suffered these things too. So Lamentations, in my opinion, is that cry out from those people that says, surely we shouldn't have all been punished for this. So that'll kind of play into this message of hope. I hope to tie it in. So here are your two words for hope. The first one, elpizo, which is the Greek word for hope used in the New Testament, and then batach, which is the Hebrew word for hope. And I wanted to mention both of them because the Greek word really plays into how the Bible will at times, and y'all have heard me talk about how God separates His people from the ancient world, right? He does things and told Israel to do things that would cause them to be completely different from the rest of the world. Well, the language, they also used it in the same way, right? Because hope to the rest of the world at the time that Jesus came was not the same idea of hope that Israel had, not the same idea of hope that the people of God had. So you have elpizo in the Greek, batach in the Hebrew. I want to give you a quote here. This is from Plato. And y'all know I love to quote. No, I'm joking. I don't ever quote Plato. But I want to use it for a point here. Man's own being thus determines what he hopes and how he hopes. And this is kind of a rough translation of what he says, but what does this mean? This basically means that man is the dictator of his own, what's the phrase? Man is the king of his own future, the king of his own destiny, right? Man creates his destiny. And this idea of hope here, and he uses elpizo, right? This idea of hope for him and for the world around Israel at the time was not this idea of this great hope and faith in God. It was this idea that man could dictate what his future would be based on his attitude, right? He could hope for something negative or positive. He could say, if a person was negative, you know what? Their future is going to be negative because they have no positive outlook. It's not really a biblically based understanding of hope, right? And so I wanted to show that to display the difference between the way the world thinks. And today, does anybody know anybody that thinks that way, right? We see it. There's billboards everywhere. There's bestseller books that tell you, you create your own destiny and you Your mindset will dictate how your life is lived. That's not godly. That's not biblical. That is the world's understanding of hope, right? So I want to give you the biblical hope, and I've broken it down. I'm not trying to get in the weeds with words here. I wasn't even going to do any kind of language, anything today, but it just kind of snuck in. This is going to be a short message, by the way. It was 20 slides, but now it's 50, so bear with me. So biblical definition in its just most purest form here is a favorable and confident expectation, right? You're waiting for something, but the Bible's definition of hope is not this negative or positive and whatever you want to make it. It's this favorable and confident expectation. It's trust. And that gets into another definition of what's biblical trust, but it's trust. It's believing in the promises of God. It's believing that when God has said he's going to do something, you faithfully wait and hope for that promise to come to fruition. It's a confidence in the deliverance of God, right? It's understanding that only God is our deliverer. He's the one that will deliver us from all this trauma and all these plights. He is the one that can save us and redeem us. And most importantly, lastly here, it's patiently waiting. And that's probably the thing that we struggle with the most, right? Patience, especially in America, we want everything right now, instant gratification. We've got to have the results right now, whether it's from my brother, whether it's from my boss, whether it's from God. I want instant results. That's not the biblical expression of hope. Hope is patiently waiting, knowing that you may not even see it in your lifetime. Hope is patiently waiting. And when it comes to the exiles, the people that were carried away into exile into Babylon, you know what their hope was? Their hope was for the next generation to be brought out of Babylon, a time that they would never see. They had this biblical hope that God would just bring these blessings on their children, knowing they would never taste them. That's biblical hope, this hope of something that you may never face in this world. And I want to give Jeremiah 17 here, and this kind of gives a good juxtaposition of the two definitions of hope, this worldly versus this godly hope, or this worldly versus this biblical hope. It says, "This is what the Lord says, cursed is the person who trusts in mankind. He makes human flesh his strength, and his heart turns from the Lord." Right? Now, we would look at this verse and probably say trust in like others, but does this not also say that you trust in yourself, right? The person who makes his own destiny, the person who relies on his own actions and attitudes to create this hope for his future, that person is the one that is talking about here. He will be like a juniper in Arabah. He cannot see when good comes, but dwells in the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land where no one lives. Right? The person who refuses to acknowledge God, he turns his back on God, he says, Matt Nappier can make his own way. He can pave his own path. That person doesn't have biblical hope. He has the hope of man, the hope in his flesh. But the person who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence indeed is the Lord, is blessed. I love this verse. I love Hebrew poetry. And that word trust there, batach. And the word confidence, batach. He's just doubling down on this idea of hope, of confidence. Right? The person who has hope in the Lord, truly that person, his hope is in the Lord. Right? He's doubling down on this difference between trusting in yourself and trusting in God. He will be like a tree planted by water. It sends its roots out toward the stream. It doesn't fear when heat comes, and its foliage remains green. It will not worry in a year of drought or cease producing fruit. That is the person who trusts in God. Sometimes we have a tendency to place our hope in the created, right? And that's the idea of placing our hope in ourselves. We're the created being. We are the created one. We can place our hope in others too. I can place my hope in Nathan. There for a while in my life as a younger person, I think I did place my hope in Nathan. Surely if I'm close enough to this righteous person, this guy who follows God, I don't have to follow God. I can just be close enough to him. I can get under that shield, right? We can have our hope in other people. We can have our hope in other things. Israel came to a point where their hope was in the temple itself and not the God who was to dwell in it. Jeremiah 7 says, do not trust, batach. Do not have hope in deceitful words, chanting, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. These people were going and they were trying to do all this obedience and doing it perfectly, and then they were going and putting their hope in other things, right? They were putting their hope in and the other gods that were just right down the hill. They were going to serve other gods. They didn't have full trust and hope in him. The difference between this mindset of Plato and this mindset of God's people in the Bible is that negative hope in the Old Testament is clearly delineated from positive hope, right? It uses different words, different languages, different context. Nowhere can you mistake the hope of God with some negative hope, right? If there is ever a time where it says this calamity is going to come to you from God, it uses the word for fear, right? You will fear Yerah. Hope in the Psalms, and I really love the Psalms when it comes to hope, because that's what most of them are, right? We have 150 chapters of these songs of hope, whether it's hope from destruction or hope that's given to God through praise of good times, or it's hope of this restoration of a kingdom from a king. You have this hope in Psalms, but it really highlights for me in the Psalms this idea that this hope of God is not a direct, it's not something you tie it to. God never says, I would say outside of Yeshua, because that is the ultimate hope, right? That our rest, we rest our salvation in. But outside of that, when talking about our lives and the writers of the Bible, hope in God is always in a generality. It's why I don't really get into date setting and doing all these things about when is God going to do this action or going to do this action. Because that's never the heart of the Bible. It's never the heart of the God. It's this hope of patiently waiting for when God chooses to act. And that's the message all through the Psalms. The Psalms have all these messages of hope, but it's never God's going to deliver me next week, or God's going to deliver me in this exact manner. It's this faithful hope of waiting, knowing that God is faithful to redeem his people. It's this patient waiting, knowing that no matter how long it takes, I know that the end result is my King and my God is faithful to redeem me, whether it's in this life or the next. That's the message of the Psalms. I got a couple examples here. Therefore, my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests securely. That word securely is batak. It rests in hope. And it's about as general as it gets, right? There's no, I'm not resting my hope in this one act, because then what happens? Just like a couple weeks ago, if we build this 613 list of commandments and we build all these checklists of things to do, I can do the same thing with God's works, right? I can say, if God gave me a list of things he's going to do to give me hope for the future, I would just do whatever I wanted to until those times came, right? So God wants a people who would turn their heart to him and patiently wait for him whenever his time is right, not ours. Psalm 27 and Psalm 16 is very powerful when it comes to this message of hope. I'd love to end this message today reading Psalm 16. We'll see how time works out. But Psalm 27, though an army deploys against me, my heart will not be afraid. Though a war breaks out against me, I will still be confident. I will still, boteach, I will still have hope. I will still have hope. He doesn't say because God's going to bring these things over here and cut off and flank the enemy here. I know exactly, no. I know that even though these people rise up against me, this army rises up against me, I'm not going to be scared. I'm going to have hope and confidence in the fact that my God is the one who created all things and is in charge. Hope in the New Testament, of course, revolves around the culmination of the epitome of hope, and that's the hope of our salvation at the end of ages that was initiated, culminated, solidified by the death, burial, and most importantly, the resurrection of Yeshua. There was a time, and I kind of chuckled today looking at this verse. I added a couple of these verses in this morning, but Luke 24 says, but we are hoping, that's that word elpizo, we are hoping that he was the one who was about to redeem Israel. Besides all this, it's the third day since these things happened. Having gone back and studied, you go back year by year and you read the same passages sometimes, and you always see something different, right? And I love Luke 24. It's a great passage for us. It becomes kind of a talking point from, an obedience standpoint. But having studied this word hope so much, it kind of brings on a different meaning, because if we understand hope to be this patient waiting, it's almost comical here because it says we're hoping he's the one to redeem Israel. Besides, it's been 3 days. And what does Yeshua say? He kind of is like, how foolish. Like, what are you talking about, man? It's just been 3 days. You don't have any patience? Where's your true biblical hope to sit and wait patiently for God to act and do what he promised he would do? And that's his response. How foolish are you And how slow to believe all the prophets that have spoken. You know, they read the prophets, no doubt. They read them how they wanted to with this instant gratification. And we always look bad on the people in the Bible that do these foolish things, but we do the same thing. God, it's been 2 days since I just recently had a headache for 11 days. It went away 2 days ago, or yesterday. I even fell into this trap of like, God, it's been 4 days of this headache, man. Come on, what's the deal here? You know, like, I want my instant gratification. We all do this. Verse 27 there is kind of our talking point, you know, and it's the beginning of Moses and the prophets. He interpreted all things concerning himself in the scriptures, but that wasn't my focus here this week, was just this idea of hope. They didn't have the hope that God required or requested or desired of them, this hope of patiently waiting for God to act. They wanted God to do what they wanted him to do right then, deliver us from this evil present age right now. And Yeshua said, you don't even understand the word hope itself, because that's what all the prophets are about. All the prophets are about this message of hope, and you've lost its understanding. Hebrews 11, of course, is this famous verse. Faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. So this is where this idea of action comes into play, right? And people talk about different mindsets of peoples, and I don't think that's as clearly defined as we like to make it be between Greek, Hebrew, and all that. But Hebrew is an action-based language in that the roots all come from action, right? But this is where you can really say there's an action to this. It's this faith. Faith is an action. You know, James, and this isn't to be a study on James, but James talks about how our faith is shown evident through our works, our actions, our obedience to God. Our faithful works are our faithful obedience. And so that's what we see, this hope, this unseen part, this hope of what is to come, our salvation that God will deliver us to at the end of the age. That's what this faith is supposed to display. People around us should know that we're patiently waiting the return of our Lord and King to this physical realm based on our faith, on how our actions look and how we treat each other, how we operate within the creation of God. And sometimes we just don't act so patiently, and I think that totally diminishes the idea of this verse right here when we try to rush God's plan, or we try to, I won't get into that, but we try to bring God's timing closer to us than he would hope. Hope and revelation. A year ago or so, I made a statement to someone. They said something about Revelation, and I said, out of all the books in the Bible, that's probably the one I'm weakest on. And I couldn't believe I said that, because that should be a cue, and it was. So I spent a year studying Revelation and in the context of the prophets. And the overall message of Revelation is this hope, this patiently waiting. And people use this book to set times and dates and try to predict the return of God. In my humble opinion, my very humble opinion, that is not what the book is about at all. The book is a message of hope to a people who at that time and at future times would see the same suffering that the people of Jeremiah, Isaiah, that they would see. And in all intents and purposes, these people were about to suffer the same things, or had just suffered the same things that they did, because the Romans come in and they destroy the temple, they destroy Jerusalem, they take the people, they kick them out. It's the same exact thing. And Revelation has the same exact message, this message of hope. Patiently wait for God to act on your behalf. And when I went back through a few verses from the beginning of Revelation to the end this week, I said it's all the same general idea of hope. It's all this generality, this non-specific idea of hope that God will do these things. Revelation 1, 7-8 says, "Look, he's coming in the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn." And people have taken this verse and just over the centuries and literally have Jesus, Yeshua, riding on a cloud, you know, and this is so exactly literal, and I just don't know that it's that case. The very next verse is, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, the one who is, the one who was, and the one who is to come." I am the one that has acted faithfully for the past 2,000, at that time, 3,500 years. I'm the one that has no matter how you can see it, no matter what struggles you went through as a nation, I'm the one that continued to redeem you, that continued to bring you out of your struggles, that continue. That's the message being portrayed. What was John's purpose in saying this was to bring hope to a people. He's going to come back and redeem you. He's going to come back. He may come back in the clouds. I don't want to make he may be riding a cloud. I don't want to make that statement. But the point of the message is that he is going to redeem his people. We'll go through a few more. In 3, stand, I will knock at the door. It's a famous one. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. He doesn't say at some point in time in the future, at this date and time, knock on the door, I'm going to come have a meal with you. It's a general statement of hope. If you'll place your hope in me, I am faithful to come and dine with you. Revelation 12, then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, the salvation and the power of the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have now come, because the accuser of our brothers and sisters who accuse them before our God day and night has been thrown down. The accuser has been thrown down. Why? They conquered him with the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives to the point of death. Now, there's no el piso in these verses here, but this is just the epitome of hope, biblical hope for me. They did not love their lives to the point of death. They didn't say, I want to save my flesh because I'm fearful of what's to come. They had the true biblical hope of a God who would redeem them, even if it's the next generation, even if it's in the next life in the world to come. They had this true hope of patience. Revelation 21, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth and a first heaven. We all know these verses. Verse 3, then I heard a loud voice from the throne, look, God's dwelling with all humanity. I missed my slide here. And he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. How many times in Scripture have we heard almost that exact phrase? From Genesis all the way to Revelation. Why? Because God's reminding his people that you're to have the same hope that I've tried to instill in you. I've tried to beg from you the same hope of patiently waiting for me to act from the beginning. No matter your despair, your trials, your tribulations, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. I'm not trying to over-spiritualize Revelation here. But the message is hope. The message is know that is coming and have hope today. Know that I will be faithful to deliver the new heaven, the new king, the new earth, the new kingdom, I will deliver that as I have promised, but let that be what instills hope in you today. All right, so my intro to hope is done. We can get into the message for today. I think I'm doing all right because I got 30 minutes. So hope in Isaiah 54, and we kind of talked about that a little bit, is this hope, and Isaiah is preaching the same message that Jeremiah did. You know, you wicked people, you've done these horrible things, you've gone astray. And Jeremiah and Isaiah, they were kind of somewhat contemporary, not exactly. But there's no evidence that they ever knew each other, ever met, anything like that. There's no evidence that Isaiah read Jeremiah's works. But I personally believe in the inspiration of the Spirit of God, and I believe that the Spirit of God inspired them to write the words the way they did. So as I've been studying Lamentations, and then this past week and a half, I go through Isaiah 54. I just keep going back and forth, Lamentations, Isaiah, because Lamentations is this crying out of the people to God, and Isaiah 54 is almost God's response to the people, right? And the Spirit of God is preaching the same message because they're writing to the same people, right? They're writing to Israel. So God can reply through Isaiah to something that was written through Jeremiah. I firmly believe that. This thing is really driving me nuts. Hey, I'm going to switch to yellow. All right. So I really firmly believe that God can speak through Isaiah in a way that answers Jeremiah, right? I believe that he can give these answers, especially to us today. The Bible was not written to us, but it was written for us. It was written to a people long ago, but it was written so that we today could have benefit from it. So what I'm going to kind of do here is I'll bounce back and forth between Lamentations and Isaiah 54. And we'll just see how this crying out of people, and I hope we can all relate to this, right? Because has anybody ever lived life and not struggled? Has anybody ever not had any burdens or struggles? If you have, you're a blessed man or woman. But I've had a lot. I know a lot of people in this room have had a lot. And there's a lot more than what people know, right? There's a lot more between the people that are sitting next to you I mean, just over the past few weeks, Nathan can attest to this, this idea of what's hidden underneath these bodies of ours and inside of our minds and what people struggle with on a daily basis. A couple years ago, I kind of taught myself a lesson through an experience that I had that you can't really, the old adage, you can't judge a book by its cover. And you really can't. It seems kind of cliche or whatever, but there's always something underlying. There's always something that affects a person's behavior towards someone else, right? And just a few weeks ago, I ran into some people, a couple of guys, and I judged them. I said, man, this guy's always a jerk. I know this guy from around town. This dude's such a jerk. And got to know him, and man, he had this horrible accident with this traumatic brain injury that leaves him unable physically to express emotion to people. So, of course, he looks arrogant if you don't know him. But I never asked him a question, right? So I learned that same lesson. I continue to learn that same lesson every day, and I hope that we'll all kind of know that when we deal with people. Some of you have dealt with me in the past, and I've had a horrible attitude or my behavior has been not so kingly or godly. Maybe there was something behind that. I can tell you there was. So hopefully we can see each other through a lens that says, why? That's my favorite question. It's a question that led me down some deeper roads of studying the Bible and culture and stuff, asking the question why, but it's most importantly a question that has helped me have better relationships with people. So going into Isaiah 54, we're going to talk about some struggles, and hopefully it's a message of encouragement to you and from God. I want to open with the last verse. That doesn't seem accurate, but we're going to start with the last verse of Isaiah 54, which is verse 17. It says, "No weapon formed against you will succeed, and you will refute any accusation raised against you in court. This is the heritage of the Lord's servants, and their vindication is from me." This is the Lord's declaration. I want to say that I want to read this last verse because this message of Isaiah 54 is for a certain people. It's for the servants of the Lord. And it's not to separate us necessarily in a way that looks down our nose at people that don't serve God, but it's a way to understand that our true redemption comes from having faith in Him and serving Him with our whole hearts. He writes this message to the servants of the Lord, the people who may not have necessarily deserved all the punishment that came to them in the exile, but they suffered it anyway. And he says, this is a message for you, people. I see you. I see your heart. I see that you truly trust in God, and this is a message that God wants me to give to you. So I want to start with that. We'll go to Lamentations 1:1, and like I said, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth. The first verse of Lamentations opens up, says, "How she sits alone, the city once crowded with people. She who was great among the nations has become like a widow. The princess among the provinces has been put to forced labor." I mean, this is speaking to the same exact thing that Isaiah is speaking about, right? The city of Jerusalem, it's totally just broken down. It's totally just, she's become like a widow. She has nobody to take care of her. But this is an expression, a poetic expression of very real things that happen to the people, right? This is not just things that happened to Jerusalem, but it's things that happened to those people. There were people who became like widows. There were people who had no one to take care of them, who said, "I have faithfully served you my whole life, God, and here I am as a widow. Here I am as someone without a husband, a caretaker, as someone who has no hope, and it's worse then than it is today, but the pain is still the same," right? To be left with no protector as a woman, to be left with no protector as a child who needs a father and a mother. Those people were ripped away from those people. What does Isaiah say? "Rejoice, childless one who did not give birth. Burst into song and shout, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of the married woman." Have faith. I see your barrenness. I see your loneliness. I see the idea that you feel like a widow who has no one to care for her. When we're children, our kids, and I become more and more aware of this. I've got 4 children now. And I try to remember back when I was a child, and, you're scared of the dark. And I think I've come to the conclusion, it's just me thinking out loud, that kids aren't really scared of the dark, right? They're scared of loneliness. They're scared of being alone. It's why they run to your room at night. It's why they jump in your bed. It's still dark. It's not the darkness they're scared of. It's the loneliness. And sometimes we can feel that same loneliness late in age, right? Kind of middle age. I'm middle of the road. I've got plenty of kids and wife and parents around me, but sometimes those same feelings of loneliness as children we feel late in life. We start to feel as we get into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and God bless if you live into your 80s and 90s. Sometimes you see, you see your children pass before you. You see your husband go, your wife go, and you live a life of loneliness. God says, rejoice because I'm going to bring you to a place where you will have more children. Your elation will be as if you had more children than all the married women out there. Lamentations 1:4 says, the roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the appointed festivals. All her gates are deserted, her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she herself is bitter. What I love about Hebrew poetry is you can read a lot into these verses, but let me tell you what I see right here. I see this idea, this rejection, right? I mean, this right here is like the kid who, there was just recently, I think it was locally, I don't remember, it was on the news, this kid who invited all these people to their birthday party and not a single person came, right? That's what I see in this. I see in this, that, the roads to Zion mourn because no one's coming to these festivals. Now, he's talking about a very real situation where Jerusalem was destroyed and nobody's going up to God's house. But also the people feel rejected and they feel alone. And I'll tell you, last year I went to Sukkot up in North Carolina for half a Sukkot. They had this thing for kids where, fear's a liar. Fear's not of God. And I'll tell you, I think that my personal opinion, I think language would tell you, I don't know. Fear is the opposite of hope, right? Fear is the opposite of hope. That's not to be demeaning because we all fear. We all struggle with fear. So they had this thing for kids where kids were supposed to throw their, write down what they're afraid of and throw it in this fire. It was this cool little thing. And they had that song playing, Fear's a Liar, and I got all emotional, right? Y'all know me, Mr. Emotional Matt. I got all emotional. I went over, I said, I'm writing mine down, man. Tell you what mine was. Mine was rejection. Mine was a fear of rejection, this fear of a kid at a birthday party that nobody shows up to. If I struggle every week, I get nervous when I stand up here and speak before you guys. One, because the seriousness of God's word and being able to deliver it. But my flesh struggles every week with this fear of rejection, that every single person in this room is going to reject me as I stand up here to do God's work. And that's a lie from the devil, right? That's a lie from Satan. And but that's my number one struggle, is this fear of rejection, this fear of, and that's what people were dealing with then. Imagine being totally kicked out of your country, taken away, and you're a faithful person of God, and you say, why have you rejected me? This is what they felt. Isaiah 54 says, enlarge the side of your tent, and let your tent curtains be stretched out. Do not hold back, lengthen your ropes, and drive your pegs down, for you will spread out the right and to the left, and your descendants will dispossess nations and inhabit the desolate cities. This idea of spreading your tent out, right? Because God's house at this time was this big, great structure in Jerusalem, but what did it start out as? A tent. It started out as a tent. This idea of stretching your tent out is to bring in all the people of the nation. Everybody's going to come to your party soon. Have faith and hope. Don't feel rejected. This has happened to you, but hope in me, and everybody's going to come to the party eventually, right? God says, I just have hope in me. I'm the one that can bring that rejection. I can put it aside. I can take care of it. Lamentation 1:7 says, I'm getting lost here. During the days of her affliction and homelessness, Jerusalem remembers all of her precious belongings that were in her days of old when her people fell into the adversary's hands. She had no one to help. The adversaries looked at her, laughing over her downfall. And this is just really another sense of rejection, this idea that everybody has left. Not just God, but everybody has left her side. Nobody is there. Has anybody ever felt that way, that I went through this struggle? I just talked to somebody yesterday, and they said, I have so many struggles and nobody cares. I have so many struggles and nobody wants to know about them. Nobody wants to listen to them. Nobody wants to help me with them. Nobody cares. Shame on us as a people. Shame on us as a kingdom people if we treat people that way. That wasn't here locally. Shame on us if we can't do that for other people. But what's God's answer in 54? Do not be afraid, for you will not be put to shame. Don't be humiliated, for you will not be disgraced. For you will forget the shame of your youth. You will no longer remember and the disgrace of your widowhood. Indeed, your husband is your maker. His name is the Lord of armies, and the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. He is called the God of the holy earth. It's so hard sometimes in struggles to think that this person, this God, this creator, this being that we can't see, that person can bring us all of our comfort that we need. He is our husband. He's our friend. He's our Redeemer. He is the one that erases our past. That's the one that I struggle with. I can tell you at this point in my walk with God, if you ask me about things I do or did in my past, sometimes I have to sit and think about them for a while and say, oh yeah, okay, I do remember that. But God has taken that away. I don't remember the shame of my youth, the shame of my past. I don't remember that. Sometimes we're stuck with no spouse for a long time. We think, God, what in the world is happening to me? Why do I have no loved one? He says, I am your husband. I'm your Baalim. I am the one who will give you that same comfort. Lean on me and I will be the one to give you that comfort. That's hard to hear. That's hard to realize. Sometimes God may be holding that back because he wants you to fully rely on him. Sometimes he just wants you to glorify him in your faith and your hope, right? Isaiah 54:6 says, for the Lord has called you like a wife deserted and wounded in spirit, a wife of one's youth when she was rejected. All this stuff plays into rejection, and these are all our typical struggles that none of us want to talk about. But God says he can take those away. Lamentations 5, Lord, bring us back to yourself so we may return. Renew our days in former times unless you have completely rejected us and are intensely angry. This idea of complete rejection, but God says, no, it's not complete. He said, I deserted you for a brief moment, but I will take you back with abundant compassion. In a surge of anger, I hid myself from you for a moment, but I will have compassion on you with everlasting love, with chesed. This idea that he did hide his face for a while, and he did become as if he wasn't present. But he says that's only temporary. I will have everlasting love with you. I will do there's so many people in my history, my past, that I love dearly, that I had so much compassion for and feelings and emotions for, that left and turned their back, and they're not coming back. I can tell you right now, unless God tells them, turn around and go and run and wrap your arms around Matt Nappier right now, they're not coming back. But God says, I'm the compassionate one. I'm the one that will do what no man can do. I'm the one that will have faithfully returned to you and welcome you with open arms, regardless of what you've done. 54:9 says, for this is like the days of Noah, and this really surprised me. I've never looked at Isaiah 54 in this sense, where he just doubles down on this idea of hope and compassion. He doubles down in a way, and he says, you remember that covenant I made with Noah? I'm making that covenant today about my love for you and what you can place your hope in. I made a covenant with Noah that I would never destroy the world again, and today I make a covenant with you that I will always love you as a people. I will always be the person that you can rely on. I will always be the one that will fill the empty voids that life brings you and people cause. Verse 10 says, though the mountains move and the hills shake, my love will not be removed from you, and my covenant of peace will not be shaken. The Bible talks about mountains a lot. It says faith will move a mountain, and all these people get wrapped around that verse and the magic and the miracles. God can do it, yeah. It's not the point of the verse, but God can do it. But the mountains are the most immovable thing in the world, right? We can blast holes in them. We can go to the Rockies and try to pick one of them jokers up and move them. Only God can do that. But he says, even in the context of mountains, my faith, my covenant of peace is more sturdy than that. I will not leave you or forsake you. One of my favorite passages from Isaiah comes from a few chapters earlier in 42, and I read this passage so wrong for so many times. And I went back and studied this passage in depth within the Hebrew and all that, and it changed my perception of the verse. It says, I have kept silent from ages past. I've been quiet and restrained myself, but now I groan like a woman in labor, gasping breathlessly. I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all their vegetation. I will turn rivers into islands and dry up marshes. I used to view this, and it's kind of hard in the English sometimes in that chapter to see it. I used to view this as him speaking to Israel. They've been so horrible, I'm going to basically lay their land to waste. No. What God's talking about here is there's people that have risen up against Israel. There's people that I've allowed to take them captive, and they're going to treat them wrongly. But like a mother who has this mama bear syndrome, there's not a hill or mountain that's going to cause me not to bring them back to me. There's not a hill or mountain, no vegetation. I will flatline their entire land to pave a way for my people to come back to me. That's our God. He's our mama bear, right? And some of us struggle with this idea of, again, rejection, or this idea of not having parents we think that God should have given us, but God says, I'm that parent. I'm that one that will lay waste to the entire land to bring you back to my house. I'm the one that will see that these mountains and these hills will be moved. I will dry up all vegetation. You won't have to run through any briars or thickets. I'm going to make the path smooth. And he did. Lamentations 1:2 says, she weeps bitterly during the night. With tears on her cheeks, there is no one to offer her comfort. No one from all her lovers, all her friends have betrayed her, yet they have become her enemies. 11 and 12 says, poor Jerusalem, storm-tossed and not comforted. I will set your stones in black mortar. I will lay your foundations. He talks about all these jewels. Sometimes we struggle with not feeling any value. One of my favorite things to talk about are these things right here, right? This cord of blue. And how it cost so much money for Israel to have to. No doubt, some people had to pay for their friends to be able to get some blue in their tassels, right? But why? Because God said, you're valuable to me. Sometimes we feel so worthless. We feel like we've been tossed away, dumped in the trash. We have no value. Nobody cares for nothing, right? God says, I value every single one of you. I will build up these fortifications of pearls and rubies. I will do all these things to show you how valuable you are to me. Lamentations 1:5 says, her adversaries have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. The last part of this verse, her children have gone away as captives before the adversary. This one hit me hard. And I'm not saying that I love my children more the more I have them, but I think I do. I think that I understand the gravity of a verse like this more now than I did 7 years ago when I first had my first child. I didn't think that was possible. But what is worse, what will bring me more anxiety than anything else is to sit around and think about what someone else can do to my kids, you know? My wife, she's pretty beast mode. She'll take care of herself. She takes care of me all the time. But my kids, man, if I hear about stories of things that people do to kids, and I just lose my mind. I can't dwell on it. And so I can't imagine what these people thought about when their kids were ripped from them, when their kids were taken away from them. Lamentations 1:20 says, Lord, see how I am in distress. I am churning within. My heart is broken. Outside the sword takes the children. Inside there's death. But Isaiah 54 says, then all your children will be taught by the Lord. Their prosperity will be great. And you will be established on a foundation of righteousness. You will be far from oppression. You will not be afraid. You will be far from terror. It will not come near to you. I know the struggles and the pains that a lot of people have with children when it comes to, some people don't even have their kids. Some people have to share their kids, and some people barely get to see their kids. Some people lost their kids. God says, have hope in me. I will bring joy abundantly at a point where there will be no struggles with these things that the world can bring. The one thing about Lamentations, and it's kind of like the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. We always talk about the heart of the Torah, Leviticus 18 and 19. Don't do these things. Well, there's this heart of Lamentations. Through all these struggles and all these crying out to God and these unanswered prayers and these things in Lamentations, right in the heart of it, chapter 3, verse 61 through 63 says, Lord, you heard their insults, all their plots against me. The slander and murmuring of my opponents attack me all day long. When they sit and when they rise, look, I am mocked by their songs. Isaiah 54 says, if anyone attacks you, it is not from me. Whoever attacks you will fall before you. Look, I have created the craftsman who blows on the charcoal fire and produces a weapon suitable to the task. And I have created the destroyer to cause havoc. God says when these people, has anybody ever felt like they just totally get attacked on the left and on the right by people in your life all the time? I mean, I've been through waves of that, right? I went through waves of, sometimes it's self-inflicted, I'll tell you, at least in my experience. Sometimes my attacks have been self-inflicted, but other times it's not. And in our flesh, we want to say, God, please rise up and destroy these people right now, or God, please set this person straight right now. Expose them for who they are right now so that everybody can see. God says, have hope. Patiently wait. And I've learned over the years that when I patiently wait, God truly reveals himself and his character, and he will reveal the character of others. But he may reveal your character if that's the one that needs to be revealed. So patiently wait. I spoke too early on Lamentations 3. I forgot I had one more example. This is the one I was looking for, the heart of Lamentations. Remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the poison. I continually remember them and have become depressed. Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Therefore I have hope. I call to mind all of these afflictions, not to dwell on them, not to be totally dismayed, not for it to totally make me a person who cannot work for the kingdom, but I bring these things to mind so that I'll have hope. I was bringing up, I stumbled across this verse in, I might get booed off of the stage when I bring this up, but I stumbled across this verse in the Message translation. But I really liked it. The Message is there to try to bring the message of God in a way that some people can understand modernly, right? So it says, I'll never forget the trouble and the utter lostness, the taste of ashes, the poison I've swallowed. I remembered it all. Oh, how well I remember the feeling of hitting rock bottom. But there's one thing that I will remember, and remembering is that I keep a grip on the hope of God. I mean, I really like that. So kudos to the Message on Lamentations 3:19 through 21. So we'll wrap up here. Isaiah 54. Remember, this is a chapter for those who have hope in the Lord, those who are God's servants, who are God's kingdom people. And I do have 3 minutes, so I want to read. I really do want to read Psalm 16. This totally encapsulates the idea of hope in the Psalms and the idea of biblical hope. It's not something that God says, I'm going to deliver you at this time from this specific thing, that he wants a people that will fully trust in him and have hope and patience that in his timing, whether it's in my physical lifetime or not, that he will be that redeemer. It says, protect me, God, for I take refuge in you. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have nothing good besides you. As for the holy people who are in the land, they are the noble ones. All my delight is in them. The sorrows of those who take another god for themselves will multiply. I will not pour out their drink offerings of blood, and I will not speak their names with my lips. Lord, you are my portion and my cup of blessing. You hold my future. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I will bless the Lord who counsels me, even at night when my thoughts trouble me. I always let the Lord guide me, because he is my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests in hope. For you will not abandon me to Sheol. You will not allow your faithful one to see decay. You reveal the path of my life to me, and your presence is abundant joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures. For the grace of God has appeared. Oh, that was the end. To reveal your path of life to me, in your presence is abundant joy. At the right hand are eternal pleasures. Sometimes our hope is not something that will be answered in this lifetime. Sometimes our hope has to be something that transcends our laments, has to be something that transcends our pain. Sometimes our hope has to be understood that it'll only be brought to fruition in this kingdom to come, in this time that the New Jerusalem comes. And I know that's hard to rest in. I hope that this message of Isaiah 54 brought some comfort and peace to some here. I'll tell you, if you have any struggles you want to talk about or pray about, I'm definitely here to pray about them with you. I can share mine. I've got plenty of them. Nathan, I know he's open and willing. Our elders, William and Greg, and I can't keep up anymore. We've got a lot of people here that'll pray for you, pray with you, talk it out, struggle with you. Lean on us. Lean on God and the people he's placed in our life. So Titus 2, this is kind of my favorite New Testament passage when it comes to this idea of biblical hope, and we'll close with this. It says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, instructing us to deny godliness and worldly lust and live a sensible, righteous, and godly way in the present age." Faithful people who place their hope in God, right? While we wait, I would even add patiently, while we wait patiently for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ. He gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to cleanse for himself a people for his own possession, eager to do his good works. People who are eager, like Isaiah 54 says, to be servants of the one true King. You can rest your hope and faith in him when you serve him. So with that, we'll go into prayer. Father, we bless you. We thank you for your Sabbath day. We thank you for a kingdom people that comes together for your kingdom purpose. We thank you for the hope, ultimately, that we have in the resurrection of Yeshua, our Messiah. We thank you for the hope that you have given us in our daily lives to place our trust and hope in you, knowing that you are the one that can dispel all of our struggles, our woes, our trauma, our death, our bereavement, our afflictions, our pain. We thank you for the hope that you have placed within us to look forward to the time that you totally demolish all of those, that you totally destroy all hills, valleys, waters, fields, everything to bring us back to you and to live eternally in your presence. We love you. We bless you. Amen. If anybody has any questions or comments?